Thank you, and good morning, London.
Sorry.
Good morning?
Morning.
Have we all had our coffee? No? No? Guys are going to go grab coffee? Don't worry, it's me and then the break. Then you can go grab coffee. So, okay, cool. So, let's start with a funny story. So, do you know that the use of the word delve has risen 10 times? There were 2,000 papers that used the word delve a few years ago in the early 2000s. Now, about 18,000 papers a year use the word delve. And you see, the problem is people are saying, hey, you know, we're using foundation models, and this is how you can easily catch people who are using GPT to write their papers. But I don't know, how many people here learned English as a second language? Third language? Yeah, right? And for those of us who learned it as a second and a third language, we used to sleep next to the dictionary, right? You're like, man, I have to write an essay tomorrow. And you look for those big words. You're like, I need something to express depth. And you come up with sentences like, you know, what is networking? It's serendipitous meetings where you find solace in sharing your ideas, right? You come up with very interesting words. But now you're being told, hey, if you use that kind of language, you might be using a GPT. You might be using a foundation model to come up with your sentences. And so for those of us who learned English as a second or a third language, we have to be a bit more careful. You can't just say, oh, I'll be delving into this topic. You have to take a step back and say, you know, I'll be talking about generative AI. No, you're not just delving into it. So my name is Lawrence. I'm a software engineer by design. Sometimes I do sales and I talk to startups, and that's what I'm doing this year. Is I engage with African startups. We look at technology and we see what can you do with AWS. And today we'll be talking a bit about the considerations for generative AI, especially if you're looking to build a generative AI solution and seeing how much capital is in this room. What kind of questions should you also be asking startups that claim to be using AI? So think of this session as going both ways. Look at it as if you see an AI solution or if you see a problem that you can solve with artificial intelligence, what exactly should you be looking at? Now, a critical thing to mention is that last year was the year of proof of concept. We saw a lot of startups trying to build new things. And 2024, however, is different. It's the year of production. Guys are now coming up with solutions, and we are seeing some solutions, which I will talk about, that have come out and people are actually solving real problems. It's no longer a question of what if, it's a question of when and how. And it's important to mention that AI is not new. There's a panel soon after this that asks, is AI hype or is it real? Are we actually seeing something happening? And it's, I think, pretty cool to mention, at least in the country where he's from. Sir Isaac Newton said, you know, if I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. AI is old, right? AI has been around since the 1950s. And in fact, actually, fun fact for technical people in the room, the first program was actually written in the University of Manchester. So you're actually seeing this whole evolution. Generative AI is just the current iteration. We've seen AI used to help people see. We've seen AI used to help people communicate. And now we're seeing AI being used to help people understand the data and communicate better. And so generative AI is just in its transition. This is just a journey. And I believe in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you'll no longer think of it as generative AI. Like, think about all the technology you use around you. There was a time it was, we actually even don't think about it, right? It was a mobile phone. Hey, it's not just a phone, guys. It's a phone that you can carry. Damn. Amazing, right? I don't know how many of us remember our first mobile phones, and you're like, I no longer have to go and put in coins at that weird telephone machine. It's the same thing now with generative AI. When technology becomes so ubiquitous, it's invisible. But here's the amazing thing, is you stand at the cusp of building that technology. right? Some of the largest tech companies we see today were building when the technology was new. And I believe in this room, we see a lot of companies willing to take on new solutions to tackle old problems. And who knows where you'll be standing in the next 5, 10, 15 years. Disruption is just around the corner. And so generative AI is just one step. And what makes it really, really powerful is it's built on, again, the shoulders of giants. I don't know how many of us remember the big data conversation 5, 10 years ago, right? Everybody was like, big data this, big data that. And we're like, really? Right? I have my data, but is it really big data? Do I really need to be putting all this data in one place? And the good thing is, due to the technologies that were built to both ingest, consume, and make sense of that data, we're now able to see generative AI. We wouldn't be here without that. Thanks to programming languages that were actually built to manage that data. And any Python developers in the room? Yeah, I see a few Python devs. Thanks to actually being able to consume that, you now have AI that's better than where we were. And so this has been a journey, and we will keep going with it. So I'd like to repeat something I shared in Nairobi, because I think it's absolutely critical as we go forward, is to understand where do you stand in your generative AI journey. And at AWS, we see 3 big user categories. Number 1 is consumers, people who will be using the artificial intelligence. And this is relatively easy. Developers, you're most likely using it to write predictive code. If you've been messing around with the GPT apps, you are a consumer. You're actually just using it. Second is integrators, right? People who are using existing foundational models and building solutions on them. And this is where we see a lot of startups playing, right? Everybody is able to now go in, consume what has already been built, integrate it into an existing process, and make it available to consumers. And then last but not least are builders. And these are people who are actually building foundation models. These are the developers who go in and do the really hard math. Because trust you me, AI is just really hard math, and we'll take a small look at it. I don't know, please don't worry. I won't go deep into the math. I'm absolutely horrible at it. It's just really hard math, and you need people who can go in and build those models. And we'll talk a bit about the technology that makes that possible. So you're in one of those 3 buckets, but maybe you're looking at it from an organizational perspective. What can I do with AI internally in my organization? Or if I'm talking to startups, what could they be doing? How can they provide value? And how can AI provide value in that company? Number 1 is enhancing customer experiences, right? Making it easier to find services. And I think the classic one that everybody has tried or is already engaging with, whether you know it or not, is, right, chatbots. Service chatbots, being able to hop in and ask a question. It reduces the amount of time and effort on the back end, and it saves costs. The second one is boosting employee productivity. I don't know how many of us here love emails, sitting in front of that computer 3, 4, 5 hours a day. If you can make that faster, I'm pretty sure you would, right? And so you're able to reduce that time. And last but not least is also optimizing business processes. And this is true, so true for Africa. I don't know how many of us have had the privilege of falling sick in an African country. I'll raise my hand. I was born there, right? And you've gone to the hospital, and you have to start the paper process, and you start with counter number 1, who needs this document, and counter number 2, and then counter number 3. By counter number 4, you're puking on the floor, and by counter number 5, they have to put you in the hospital, but they're like, where's your insurance document? And you're like, I give it to guy at number 3. They're like, oh yeah, we can't find it, I'm sorry. And you have to chill there and wait. Sorry, that's a very true story. But now, with artificial intelligence, you can digitize this. You can make it easier. You can optimize the process, reduce the amount of time being spent walking through a classical process, right? And this is really, really powerful technology. But we need to also talk a bit around where we see the innovation coming in. Number 1, as I've already mentioned, is chatbots, right? They make it easy for you to build new experiences. But now with voice, right, you can see it's actually easier to have a conversation, drive actual interaction that doesn't require you to sit and type. And now, who knows what will be coming next? Video, etc., etc. The experience with computers is becoming more and more human. or human-like. Who knows where that's heading next? Second, I've already mentioned a bit about productivity, but also insights, right? We spoke a bit about big data, but now more than ever, you can actually ask questions of your data. You can have natural language queries. You basically ask, what does this look like? What do my profits look like this year? What do you predict the issue could be? And because as someone who sits and works with Excels all day, you know it really, really sucks trying to crunch in Excel. Why waste that time when you can use the power of artificial intelligence to do that? And last but not least is creativity. How many minutes do you think I spent on that Isaac Newton picture? Anyone? 30 seconds, right? Yeah, right? I know it sucks for artists, but I think of it as two ways. Number one is it democratizes the process of making art. That's one, right? Because we can't all afford to hire an artist on the go. But also number two, it does something that's very unique to technology, is it empowers everybody to get to their end goal. And so who knows what the art revolution in the next 5, 10, 15 years looks like. As we see more and more image creation, music creation, it's going to be a very, very interesting space. And so we see a lot of very strong use cases, chatbots, virtual assistants, personalization for my developers, code generation, data to insights, conversations. And what I'll try and do by the end of this session is actually bring that to life and show you actual startups, or at least one actual startup that has managed to take this process and make it work. So let's talk a bit about unlocking that potential. You're interested, you're like, hey, man, I love generative AI. I want to get on this bus. I want to use it right now. Where do I begin, right? The first thing is it's absolutely critical to understand foundation models because we see as AWS that not one model will rule them all. Every foundation model has its strengths and its weaknesses, and each and every one can give you a different outcome. So we as AWS decided to take a very interesting approach. Instead of giving you, hey, here's one model, try and do everything with it, you get to choose the model you want to work with. And like I said, each one of them does something unique. I think Stability AI for image generation is absolutely amazing. We have our own models as Amazon called Amazon Titan. You have Anthropic with whom we have a partnership building Claude, which is amazing for coding, and I have used that. You have Cohere, you have Mistral, Meta with their open source models as well. You can actually go in and provide that. And so if you're a developer or an engineer wondering, hey, which model do I use? How do I make sure I'm not stuck going deep down one rabbit hole? With Amazon Bedrock, you actually get a choice. You get to pick and choose. And here's the best part. You can switch them up on the fly. You can literally drop a model today, spin one up, and go in and keep building. And so that way, you're no longer locked. You get to enjoy the flexibility of building and trying new things as you move along. However, foundation models, as we've used them, are usually used, and I know most of us have already installed some GPT application on our phones. It's mostly for chat, right? You come in, you ask a question, you get an answer. And that's how it is with chatbots, right? You ask a question, you get an answer. But what if you want to do more? You want it to actually carry out an action. And this is where being able to get foundation models to do tasks, generative AI to actually do something, not just give you an answer, but carry out an action in the real world. This is the true potential of generative AI, and we'll take an example and see what you need to do there. But a few things are critical here. Number one is you need to give it instructions. You need to be very clear. There's an actual new world of programming called prompt engineering. It's a very interesting space. I have my thoughts about it, but it's the new hot thing, right? Being able to give a generative AI instance clear instructions, because I know how many of us have experienced AI hallucinations? Yeah, I can see, yeah, right? And so the trick is you need to be more specific. And so being able to give that clarity and being able to provide those clear instructions is absolutely critical. But also number two is data, right? And we'll talk a bit about this. And then the third bit is integration with your applications. And usually this is through API calls. And last but not least, being able to carry out the actions and provide security. And so we do have a method for that. It's called agents. And with agents, you can go in, provide instructions, but also give clear outputs. You can have generative AI interacting with your application, making orders, interacting with APIs across your website. And so that way, if a user needs data updated, you're not making a log and someone going on the back end manually going to do that. You actually have an API going in and managing that. And so the critical part then becomes your data, right? It's what makes you unique. If everybody is using the same model, what makes you stand out? The AI marketplace is about to become really big. It might be a bubble at the moment, right? So what makes it different between you and the company next door? And the thing is, every generative AI application is underpinned by massive amounts of data. And so if you get your data foundation right, your application is more usable. And so and I think this is Africa's big problem, is our data landscape is actually missing in most cases. And so a lot of the generative AI applications we see end up being generic. And so if you're a startup looking to build in the AI space, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, where's my data? Do I have access to the right data? Am I collecting data in the right way? Having that accurate data in that space is critical, because you move from generic generative AI into an AI application that understands your business and your customers. And you have a number of options, right? So you have a large model. You could be sitting on Anthropic, you could be using Llama 2, et cetera, et cetera. How do you make it work for you? And the trick there is customization. And there are many ways to approach customization. Number one is retrieval augmented generation. I love this one. We've spoken a bit about hallucinations, right? So how do you prevent the AI giving its own answers? We've seen some very interesting stories out there of, airline tickets being given on discounts, et cetera, right? It's been a very fun space. But with retrieval augmented generation, you're basically asking the AI to do one thing. Before giving an answer, check my database. Check my data. So as you retrieve the answer, go in, look through my database, and double check. And so where AIs nowadays don't say, I don't know, you could actually have the system say, I do not know. I need to go and check. And so that is the power of retrieval augmented generation. You could also go for fine-tuning. So fine-tuning is a bit more interesting, slightly more expensive. With fine-tuning, what happens is you already have a working model, and you give it some extra information to learn from. And so that way, you take what already works, and you improve the model. You customize it for your use case. And then last but not least is continued pre-training. While fine-tuning usually happens after the model is ready, continued pre-training happens before. And this is the largest and probably the most expensive way to actually train the model, short of building it yourself, is because you're taking huge amounts of data and actually training that model and making sure that anytime you get new information, you actually go in and improve it. And so let's take a quick look behind the curtain. I said math is going to scare us. So here's some scary math. Let's take a look at it. So like I said at the beginning, AI is just really complex math, right? And sometimes, in case you're looking at it from what's actually happening on the back end, a large language model is basically doing predictions at its core. That is all it does. It looks at the current word and tries to figure out what's the next best word, what's the next best sentence, or the next best action that fits the context. And so you're actually able to take human text, and what happens on the back end is it converts that into vector coordinates, quite literally on a graph. And based on the information it has, it can pick and choose and see which words are closer to each other. For example, a puppy, in this example, is closer to a dog than it is to a cat. And so if you're asked to actually provide some extra information, if it's asked to generate, it's more likely to go dog and puppy rather than puppy and cat, right? Because it groups them together. At the end of the day, it's really boring linear algebra. But let's bring it to the real world. This means if you were to search something as simple as golf shoes, without what AI does, you'll get everything. You'll get bags for golf shoes. You'll get stickers. You'll get plastic golf tees. But with context and with a bit of generative AI, you can actually lock in and add some semantic search, and you'll be able to get the actual item. And the reason I use this example is because, well, one, I do work for a retailer, and this is what most of what we do, is improving the ability of people to actually go in and search for items. But number two is that you're actually able to go in and reduce the amount of effort anyone has to go in and look through items. And this is just one basic example. And remember what I was talking about, retrieval augmented generation? You're actually now able to do that and have it go into the foundational model. Meaning, if you are looking to improve an AI model, it's very easy. You just need to add a layer of search into your data, and you can provide context. It makes these solutions super fast and super easy, but that's enough for the math. I wanted to give you guys a small idea of what happens on the back end. Yes, so now think of a very good example of a virtual agent, right? If you were doing a simple virtual agent pre-AI, my friend, you had your work cut out for you, right? You had to go in, feed it data, make sure your data is always accurate. You make sure your data is, you're using cookies to track your user, airlines and hotels. You're going in and checking their history and what they're doing. But now with generative AI and the layer of data that you can put in, you no longer need to struggle so much. You can easily track all the users' data, go in and make sure it's available, and build a solution that is contextual to that user. And so when Lawrence goes in and asks, what's my next best flight to, I don't know, Paris, it can check my history. Lawrence flies in the morning, right? So I'm more likely to get a morning flight versus Lawrence flies in the evening, looking for an evening flight, right? And so you're actually able to use a user's data, and you also company data in case you're running promotions to provide a better solution. So we've spoken a bit about data. We've spoken a bit about generative AI and some of the things that you can do with it. But I'm going to underpin this story of the data foundation. It is absolutely critical. Your data needs to be comprehensive. You need to have it integrated. I know many of our businesses have different databases for different things. And if you're looking to provide a better solution, you have to bubble all that up. And last but not least, and this is a word we've had here so many times, is governance. Governance, governance, governance. AI is like it's just like old computers, right? It's garbage in, garbage out. Meaning if your data is not clean, your data on the other end will also not be clean. And so having really good governance across the board really helps. And you could be looking at things like improving the speed, driving end-to-end governance with PII. I nearly forgot I'm in Europe. So GDPR plays a very key role, right? You want to ensure that the data you're bubbling up to your end users is clear. They can go in, view, edit, delete, and even export it. You want to also ensure that you're going in and empowering and training your users. So what are the key considerations? Number one, you want to be able to move quickly. The data is key. I think I've repeated that like 10 times. But number two is identify use cases, right? AI is not a panacea. AI will not solve everything. But there are a few things that AI is very good at. And so if you're looking at integrating it into your organization, look for use cases that actually work for you. And number three is, of course, empower your employees, empower your people. It's a change management process just like any other change management process. You want people to come on board and be empowered on this. And the good thing with AI is, unlike most technology, is it's level ready. It doesn't really matter where you're coming in from. For hardcore developers, you have that level. You can go in and engage it at that point. For really inexperienced, non-technical people, you also have a place where you can go in and engage as well. Number two is customize. Look at your data, see what your organizational solution is, and build towards it. Ensure you have security and privacy. And I think this has been a big issue in the last couple of years, right? We've seen a lot more data hacks, a lot more data leaks. So protect your data at its core. Ensure that it's there and it's also readily accessible and it's ready for AI. Although nowadays, with the kind of layers of data that we have, almost all data is ready for AI. I won't dive too much into that. And last but not least is, of course, moving from experimentation into scale. You want to be able to go in, make sure that your costs are low, latency is low. AI is very data intensive. It goes in, crunches through huge amounts of data and gives you an answer. And so you need to make sure that your costs are manageable and you can actually go in and easily manage that. And last but not least is security considerations, right? Are you resilient? How strong is your legal framework? I think there were some lawyers on stage just a few minutes ago, right? Do you have a human in the loop? I think we've seen a few horror stories of AIs going completely rogue, which is kind of sad, but you need to be able to come in, step in, and shut them down in case it comes to that. So, what do we think the future holds for AI? Number one is agents, which we've spoken about, but number two, I think, is the more interesting bit, which is multimodal AI. Right now, we see a lot of AI focused on one thing, text or image. But as we go forward, and even based on some recent announcements, we see the ability to fuse the two. You have more text, more images, and soon video. And so as you go forward and you're looking at what AI solutions can you build, think around, hey, maybe I can fuse something else into this. It's no longer just text. Number three is multiple models. Like I said, no one model will rule them all. And so you have a chance to actually go in and specialize on one path or the other. And last but not least is the growth of a regulatory framework. In the last, I would say 20 years, technology has been racing far ahead of regulation. But we're slowly seeing a shift as regulation catches up, so that way we can ensure, especially with artificial intelligence, that the data that is being used to train it is non-biased and is well regulated. Sorry. So, number one, select the right use case. Like I said, not everything requires AI. So, does your solution really need AI? Maybe you're looking at a machine learning model, which I think is absolutely perfect and can solve your problem. Number two is, what's your budget, right? And we see a lot of startups not go through each and every consideration. You want to go in and experiment, and I love that, developers especially, but you need to make sure you're actually able to go in and look at the feasibility as well. Last but not least is, do you have the data for that use case? In case you do not, then maybe what you need to be looking at is a data collection framework. Maybe you need to improve the data that you have. But if it fits your model, you have a problem you're going to solve, and you have the budget to go in and run it, we say go in and build. And so once you have your set of use cases, simple. You know, I like math, so put it in a graph. If you can drive the most impact with the lowest amount of cost in terms of people and time, go ahead and do it. And so that way you can easily choose a use case that works for you. Because the powerful thing about AI is it can fit into various parts of your business. So you need to pick and choose. And once you're good to go, empower your teams. At AWS, we have lots of tools that you can use. We can even come in fact, we have a lot of our startup team is in town. We can actually sit down with you, understand your use case, and actually share what are some of the trainings that you can go in and take. You can even get certified if you so wish. There are very many paths available to you. And last but not least is get started on your use case. And my strategic recommendations here would be number one, keep your eyes open. The world of AI is moving pretty fast. And what we think is the norm right now will definitely not be the norm in 5, 10, 15, even months. Things are going that rapidly. Secondly is no one size fits all. Just because it works for startup A does not mean it will work for you, right? So go in, edit, see what you can do, customize it to fit your need. Last but not least, of course, is listen and enable, empower your people. Startup teams are relatively small, right? You have a few developers, you're working on something at that moment, and you need to be able to give your people the chance to grow and try new things. And flexibility is key. Keep changing, keep it live, and the good thing is as you get more data, the better the model becomes. AI is in the worst state it will ever be. It only gets better from here. So as you grow, keep it growing. And so, as we close, I'd like to again mention AI is here to augment human capability, right? We do so much as human beings. Life is already tricky and difficult as it is. So what if we are able to take solutions and make them better? And I won't tell this story. I think they do a better job of telling it themselves. Here's an example with a startup that actually built a really amazing solution that sits close to my heart.
A woman or a man's geography shouldn't determine whether they live or die from a disease. There's one oncologist to 300 cancer patients in the United States, one oncologist to 3,000 cancer patients in Africa. We can really use tools like GenAI to close that gap, to advance health equity. The whole goal of Huron AI is to make cancer care more accessible and available to everyone, everywhere. Oncologists can monitor all their patients with our intuitive data analytics platform. Physicians can use several generative AI tools and save time and money. With Bedrock and what our team have built, you can call the patient directly from our software. That whole conversation is recorded and saved, and the transcript is done automatically, and then we have a clinical summary for that conversation. We can know exactly what interventions have taken place for a patient. That just makes medical care and oncology care more streamlined. Even though these are the early days, GenAI is coming to stay, and so we need to build fast to ensure that we don't leave a lot of people behind.
Thank you. And so imagine and transform your applications. We're here as the AWS team. We're here to help, and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much.